Welcome to the Trellix Spotlight series. My name is Nick and I will be your host. Today's session will focus on endpoint security for Linux and how to troubleshoot system utilization. This webinar will be recorded. If you prefer not to participate in the recorded session, please feel free to disconnect at this time. A link to today's recorded presentation will be emailed to all registered attendees. This webinar is a brief overview covering common use cases and scenarios regarding this topic. It is not intended to be all-encompassing. If assistance is needed, please contact Trellix technical support. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the Q&A window. This webinar may run longer or shorter based on your participation, and we recommend asking as many questions as you can to make the most of this series. If the Q&A window is not displayed, click the tab at the bottom of your session window and click on the Q&A icon. We will answer the questions during the final section of this webinar. If you experience any audio issues during the webcast, please drop and attempt to reconnect. Our speakers today are Aravind K. and Vishnu VS. Vishnu has over 3 years of experience with McAfee products. He specializes in supporting non-Windows platforms and is currently providing stand-in support for all Mac and Linux endpoint products. Aravind is working as a technical support engineer with expertise in McAfee Mac and Linux products with over 4 years with the company. He's currently delivering support and KB creation for all Mac and Linux endpoint products globally. Ladies and gentlemen, let me hand it over to Aravind and Vishnu.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. ENS Linux has two different modules, threat prevention and firewall. I and Vishnu will be explaining and demonstrating on how to troubleshoot utilization issues caused by Endpoint Security Threat Prevention module. Agenda for today's session: understanding CPU usage, exclusion for ENS for Linux, understanding memory leak, high disk utilization. I will be covering the first two and the remaining will be on Vishnu. Before getting into the troubleshooting part, let's have a quick overview on threat prevention module. ENS Linux, you can use the software on standalone and managed systems. Threat prevention detects threats and potentially unwanted software, then protects your environment based on the settings that you have configured. We have 4 components inside threat prevention. The first one is on-access scan. The on-access scan runs in the background and actively scans your computer system constantly for viruses and other malicious threats. This means the service runs in the background while your computer is running. Number 2, on-demand scan. On-demand scanning allows you to scan all or a specific file stored in the machine for viruses and unwanted content. This application runs the demand scans through a task. Number 3, access protection. Access protection allows you to define access control, policies and settings for processes, files, and directories. By restricting access to specific file and directories, you can protect your systems from vulnerabilities. Number 4, exploit prevention. This feature provides a content-based exploit prevention capability. Content support brings in signature that can automatically enforce the policies and can be updated on a regular cadence. The individual signatures can then be managed from APO and configured to block and report access. The 2 major processes that runs in the machine are MFE ESPD and MFE TPD. MFE ESPD process belongs to platform. MFE TPD process belongs to threat prevention. The number of running process for MFE TPD varies depending on the configuration, whereas MFE ESPD always uses a single process. When you have an on-access scan enabled in the machine, you could see spawn process for MFE TPD running. As shown in the picture, you could see on-access scan manager, scan factory, scan action manager. If you turn off the on-access scan component, you could immediately notice these processes getting shut down. We do have 2 more processes which will be spawned again from MFE TPD when an on-demand scan task becomes active in the machine. The process that belongs to the on-demand scan are ODS Manager and ODS Collector. Eventually, these two processes will also get shut down upon completion or termination of the task. For endpoint security in Linux mission, we have 13 different extension-based exclusions on access scan policy. We have bundled these exclusions in the endpoint standalone package. Post-installation of endpoint, these exclusions will become effective if the on-access scan is enabled and compliant. You could run the command in the screen to verify whether the exclusions are in place or not. These exclusions are not shipped with EPU extensions because the ENS extension is common for Windows, Linux, and Mac. So EPU admin could add these exclusions in the on-access scan policy if they have Linux machines in their environment. How to troubleshoot high CPU utilization caused by endpoint process. First, we need to find which process of ENS is consuming high CPU, whether it is MFE-TPD or on-access scan manager. We first need to isolate and identify which component of threat prevention is causing the issue. First, turn off the on-access scan, and if the issue still persists, next access protection and then exploit prevention. Turning off access protection and exploit prevention helps, then please submit a service request with the following data. Debug enable endpoint mir, core dump of the process, top command screenshot, and the result of the isolation you have performed. Support will analyze the dump of the process and let you know the reason and fix for the same. Access protection and exploit prevention are a lightweight component and expected not to consume high CPU. If OAS manager is consuming high CPU, let's first understand why. Whenever there is an input or output operation happens in the mission, we receive those events from kernel or FAR notify and start scanning them. When there are hundreds or thousands of IO happening in the mission, to process all the scan requests, we consume CPU, and this is an expected behavior. You could proceed with any one of the fix, that is, increasing the number of cores in the mission, or exclusion, or throttling the on-access scan CPU. Let's see the solution provided for on-access scan manager consuming high CPU in detail. If your mission has 2 core, which means the mission has 200% of CPU. So you could think about increasing the cores in the mission. If increasing the hardware is not feasible, then let's think about making some exclusion. We have an inbuilt tool in Endpoint named called on-access scan activity log. By default, this is kept disabled. Enabling this will help us to capture all the scan requests that is coming to the on-access scan. This will help us to identify the path from where the majority of scan requests is coming from. Based on the logs captured, we shall decide to exclude them in the on-access scan policy. If solution 1 and 2 are not feasible, then you shall consider throttling the on-access scan CPU. On-access scan throttling feature has been introduced from the version 10.7.5. Throttling works on the FAR notify based missions, and C group in the operating system should be enabled. First, you need to switch endpoint to FAR notify mode if it is running in kernel module. Then restart the MFE-TPD services for the changes to take effect. Once the ENSL is running in FAR notify, then enable the deferred scan. Now, what is deferred scan? By default, in endpoint, scan on write is always deferred, but not the scan on read. Enabling deferred scan helps to defer scan on read as well. So whenever there is an input or output event happening in the mission, we don't interrupt the IO, but we parallelly scan them. Once you have FAR notify deferred scan enabled, Set the on-access scan CPU limit between 50 to 99. By default, on-access scan is allowed to consume 100%. You can measure whether the CPU is applied by reviewing the output of the top command. Top command has two modes, Solaris and IRIX. IRIX mode, which is a default mode on Linux and can be switched on and off just pressing Shift plus I in the keyboard. For an example, when you specify a CPU limit of 50% and your machine has a 2-core, it means that you are providing bandwidth of 50% overall of 200% of CPU. So the top command shows CPU use for the on-access scan manager going up to 100% because top command shows CPU use for each core separately. Now switching to Solaris mode, it is fixed at 100%, means for 2-core machine, each core is calculated as 50 and the total CPU is 100%. So in this mode, you could notice on-access scan manager is consuming up to 50%. And now let's quickly take a look at the demo.
Here's my EPO, and this is the test mission I have spent for today's session, which has endpoint 10710 installed. This is the mission. Let me quickly run the top command. We could see the load on the mission is very normal. That's because I don't have much application installed here. So we don't see much activity is happening. And also we don't see the on-access scan manager at top because there is no IO even happening in the mission. Let's quickly take a look at the status of the on-access scan manager process here. It is consuming 0% of CPU at the moment. So to make this process to consume a bit CPU, what I'm going to do, I have some chunk files right here, which I will be transferring to the mission to the directory home apps admin. The time I started this transfer, you could see the on-access scan manager started to consume CPU. That's because there is a write event happening in the mission, and to scan them, it is consuming CPU. Now, to find from where the scan request is coming from, I'm going to enable the on-access scan activity log in this mission. And how to do that? All right, we have this logging enabled. Now, let's take a look at the log file to find from where the scan request is coming from. The log is so evident that major scan request is coming from home apps admin. Let me go ahead and exclude the path in the on-access scan policy, and it should stop scanning this particular path. This is the on-access scan policy I have assigned to this mission. I'm going to add the path right here, which is home apps admin and excluding these subfolders as well. Let me quickly go ahead and enforce the policy in the mission now. Collected the property successfully. Let's go ahead and enforce the policy now. Enforcement is successful. Let me quickly verify whether the exclusions has reached the mission. Yes, it did. So now it has to stop scanning that particular path. Yes, I do not see any logging that is happening, and the on-access scan manager has also stopped consuming CPU. If you come across a situation where on-access scan manager consuming high CPU, you could enable the on-access scan activity logging and find the path from where the major scan request is coming from and exclude the same in on-access scan policy like I did. If exclusion is not feasible for you, then you shall throttle the on-access scan CPU. Remember, the OS needs to have the fan notify feature and C group in the mission should be enabled. And how do you check whether the C group in the mission is enabled? Is by performing a command, a ls command on the particular path. If the C group is not enabled, then this path wouldn't be there. Once fan notify and C group part is clear, next will be switching threat prevention to fan notify mode, enabling deferred scan, and then throttling the CPU. At present, threat prevention is running in kernel module mode. You could verify that by checking the modules loaded in the kernel level. Here I could see MFE underscore file access is listed. This belongs to on-access scan component. Once I switch to fan notify, this module will be unloaded from kernel. To switch to fan notify, the command will be let's restart the MFE TPD servers to make the changes to take effect. This might take a couple of minutes to restart. Upon completion, we are going to check the on-access scan module, whether it is unloaded from the kernel. Yes, it is, because we have switched the threat prevention to fan notify mode. The next thing will be to check the deferred scan status in the mission. It is disabled. Let's enable it by running the command set deferred scan enable. Again, let's restart the MFE TPD servers for the changes to take effect. So now we have fan notify enable, and then we have the deferred scan enabled in this mission. The next thing we would be doing here is setting the on-access scan CPU limit to 60. It is successful. Let's confirm whether it is enforced correctly in the mission. Yes, it is. Remember, when you install or upgrade the product, you could always supply the commands to enable deferred scan and set the on-access scan CPU limit. But post-installation, if you would like to throttle the on-access scan CPU, it has to be done locally on the machine by executing the command like I did. I hope the information I shared will be useful. Thank you all. Over to you, Vishnu.
Thanks, Arvind. Hello, all. Memory and hard disk utilizations are the topics which I'll be covering today. Let's start with memory utilization. Mostly, memory usage is intertwined with the CPU usage of the machine. If CPU usage increases in any process, it will pull the memory to a maximum. It works vice versa also. For ENS to be installed on the machine, minimum of 2 GB RAM is must, and 4 GB of RAM is recommended. As mentioned earlier by Arvind, there are multiple ENS processes that run on a machine. In that, MFE-TPD is the parent process. Rest are all child processes. The overall memory consumption of ENS will be mapped to MFE-TPD since it is the parent process. From MFE-TPD, all other child processes will receive their part of the share of memory. For example, if MFE-TPD is consuming 400 MB of RAM, all the child processes, the memory consumption will not exceed 400 MB. It will be within the 400 MB range. To check if ENS is involved in memory consumption, look for MFE-TPD in the list of running processes. What is memory leak? A process using memory will release once the usage is over, so that other process can utilize the memory. If this doesn't happen, then the new process will not get memory to perform the task, and the application's function will not proceed further. How does the memory utilization affect a machine? The performance of the machine is impacted, resulting in slowness, lag, process hang, unable to perform activities, and ultimately resulting in crash of the system. A system reboot will sometimes help in resetting the memory count of that process or clearing the entire memory usage. If ENS processes are consuming memory at a high rate, try rebooting, and if it is still again increasing, then it needs investigation. To avoid crash of the machine due to memory availability, a swap memory was introduced. What is swap memory? It is a substitute for the RAM memory. Some part of the hard disk space is used to run applications. The swap memory will be used when the RAM memory is almost full or reached to a threshold value. Now let's look at some screenshots of the commands used, starting with the top command, then the free and the meminfo file to check the memory availability and memory details of the machine. Now let's try executing these commands. Let's start with the meminfo file to know in detail about the memory of the machine. Cat proc meminfo. It will give you all the information starting with the total memory, the free memory, available memory, and here we would be able to see the swap total and the swap free. Now, this gives a more elaborate details about the memory. So to check only the required ones, we use the free command. And this gives the memory information in bytes for the total memory used, free, and available. So to check it in megabytes, free space -m can be used. To check in gigabytes, we have to use free space -h. So in this machine, a total of 4 gig or GB of memory is available. Now let's start with the top command and see the details about the memory as well as other usage informations. The top command gives you the details about the uptime of the machine, the users logged in, the load average, the running tasks, the total CPU usage, and the total memory. Below, we would be able to see the list of running processes, which gives you the details about the process ID, the individual CPU usage, and memory of that particular process. Now, to check the actual running directory of the process, When we press C, it will give you the actual running directory of that process. And to check the memory, if you press M, it'll give you the details about the memory on the top, on the total memory. Now, to check the details about a task of endpoint security, we can try to run the on-demand scan on this machine and see if that works. So I'm first listing the task. It gives the details about the task which is applied to the machine. And we see that there's a full scan which is available. Now we'll start with the full scan on the machine. So we say run task space hyphen hyphen index space 2. The task is successfully started. So now we run the top command again. And we see the on-demand scan manager is running. And if you see, it has consumed the CPU as well as the memory of the machine. Now, we would be also able to see MFETPD running on that particular running processes. Now, to check the active directory of that particular process, we press C and we see that OPT, McAfee, ENS, TP bin, MFETPD. So this is the actual location of that particular process. Now, you would be able to see that the swap memory is showing as 0. That's because the swap memory is switched off on this machine. To check the details about the swap memory, we have to use swap on to on the swap memory. Now it's on and we can check the memory usage of the swap using the free command with a -h. Now we would be able to see that the swap memory is 4 gig in total and it is used for 456 KB and free 4 gig. So now we'll use the same top command and see if it is listed in the top command. Yes, it does. The swap memory is also available here. So to switch off the swap memory, we can use the swap off space -a command and it will be switched off. So right now, if we run the same command again, we would be able to see that the swap memory is 0. Now let's move on to the next topic. The next and final topic is hard disk utilization. The digital data like audio, video, documents, applications are stored in the hard disk. Out of these, the application related files or data like the logs or the database are the ones which will increase in size when the process runs. The ENS causing disk utilization issues are due to increased log size or corrupted database file. ENS requires a minimum of 4 GB free disk space to get installed on a machine. Starting with the installation of to the daily data update or a signature update, the war directory should have free space, otherwise it will fail. To ensure smooth functioning of the machine, there should always be some amount of available disk space for the application consumption. Let's look at the effects of hard disk utilization. If the disk usage increases and reaches a threshold, it will trigger issues like installation failure. The performance takes a hit. Applications might not run at all. The most seen or experienced error for hard disk issue is disk is full or critically full. To rectify these issues, we should know the reason for the failure. Need to check what is filling up the space in the machine. Is it an important digital data or a data that can be purged? Most of the time, the logs created by the applications will fill up the space. Let's take, for example, the debug logging of the ENS. It is to be switched on only when the verbose logging is required. Once it is done, the log settings should be reverted back to normal. Timely checkup of the hard disk space is required to know if any directory is consuming or occupying the hard disk at an alarming rate. File system corruption will make the system unusable, and hard disk failure, in which the physical component is faulty, it can be due to RAID misconfiguration or faulty component. If the issue is seen in a particular directory, then checking the contents and truncating it will help. Log files causing the same issue can be rectified by setting the purge option correctly. Let's look at the screenshots of the commands to be used for disk utilization check. The df command, the du, fdisk, and the duf. Let's try these commands in a Linux machine now. Let's check the details about the hard disk now. The df command is used to check the details about the file systems available on the machine, followed by the used and the available disk space. To change it into a readable format, we use df space -h, and it gives you in gigabytes and megabytes. Now, to check the fields only required for our output, we have to use the same command followed by -- output equal to source, size, avail. And we get the details about the fields which is only required. Now, using the du command, we would be able to see the hard disk usage of a particular directory. And to change it into a readable format, we use du space -h as earlier. And to summarize the details, or to know only the amount of data which is occupied on the hard disk, we use -hs. So 127 megabytes of data is being used by this particular directory on the machine. To check the disk partition and disk size space, we use fdisk. It will give us the details about the sector size also, along with the disk partition details. Now we move on to the next command, which is duf, which is a free utility to check the disk space, and it gives us in a tabular format where it is easily readable. Now, in this, it'll show you all the details about the local devices which is connected, along with the used, the size, and the available. Now, using the duf space -all command, we would be able to see the details about the sudo, the inaccessible, and duplicate devices. Here, let's check the details about the command output. So here it is 6 local devices which has been available, and in this, if you see, it is 7, including the SE Linux, which is one of the inaccessible devices in this machine. Now, to check the details about hard disk utilization being high and ENS being affected, let's try with the ENS installation. I already have the standalone version of ENS downloaded in this particular machine. Here, it is trying to install on this machine. Let me accept the end user license agreement. It's trying to install and it failed. It says insufficient disk space in the war directory. and it creates a log file for it. To check the details, we can go into the location, the temp location, and we see that the file is available, and we open it. Here, it gives us the clear information about the insufficient disk space in the var location. Now, to verify the same, we use the same def command, and we see the var location available is only 120 MB. Almost 94.1% is full. And as per our minimum requirement, 4 GB of free disk space is required for ENS installation. The same goes for the DAT or the virus signature update. If there is no space or available disk space in the var location, the update will fail. Now we'll rectify the installation issue since we know the reason for the failure. I have placed a folder in the var directory which is consuming the space in the var. CD. And this is the folder which I have placed to fill up the space on the var directory. So right now, let us first delete it and then we can try with the installation again. So to remove the directory which is not empty, so we have to use rm space hyphen rf slash var fill. All right, right now the directory is being deleted. Let us check the disk usage again. We'll go with df space hyphen h. All right, now the var directory is available and we can try with the installation. So we'll go with the command to install the endpoint security on the machine. All right, we still have the installation files and I'm running the install. Okay. And I accept the end user license agreement. All right, now it is getting installed on the machine. So we can wait until the installation completes and we can check the version details of the endpoint security which is installed on the machine. All right, so what we have done is we have removed the folder which I placed for demo purpose on the var location. And now we have started the installation and the installation is completed successfully and it's enabling all the components of the endpoint security. So once the installation is completed now, yes, we can check the details about the version. Let me clear the screen. Now we'll check the version details of the endpoint security installed on the machine, starting with all right. So right now the endpoint security is installed on the machine. In another machine, I have installed the endpoint security, but the data update is failing due to the var directory being full. And I have placed this particular folder in the var directory to fill up the space. Now let us look at the entries which it makes when the data update fails. Cat McAfee ENS log TP. And we are going to check the mfetpd.log. In the mfetpd log, we see that the data update task is failed, and the reason being disk space availability being less. So with these entries, we would be able to investigate further on the data update task failing. Let me clear the screen. To check the details about whether McAfee is involved in hard disk utilization, we can use the command du -h followed by the var directory of McAfee. It will give us all the information about the components which are installed on the machine related to McAfee and the size or the occupancy on the hard disk. And we would be able to conclude whether McAfee is involved in the hard disk utilization. Thank you all for your time. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Aravind and Vishnu. As a reminder, Trellix Education Services offers exceptional training to go along with our award-winning products. If you would like to learn more, please visit the website listed on the screen to see all of our offerings. Let's get our Q&A session started. I see we have several questions, but it's not too late to add your question. Please type it in the Q&A window to submit. Additionally, take a moment to fill out the survey. Your feedback
Like with OAS, is it possible to throttle on-demand scans?
That's an excellent question. I'll pick that. Yes, it is possible. So for the on-demand scan, like OAS, we do have a policy. The CPU limit by default is 100%, which could be total between 25 to 99%. This is possible on both managed and standalone missions. Missions managed by APO, we can deploy the on-demand scan in two different ways. Policy-based on-demand scan and it is a custom-based on-demand scan. Both have the feasibility to throttle the on-demand scan CPU.
Hope that helps. Got it. Okay. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for that. How much space is needed in /var for operation of endpoint security for Linux?
Let me take that question, Arvind. So regarding the var directory, we would require a 3 GB partition and a 750 MB of free space. This is after the installation also, we would require the space so that the data updates are happening on the machine. So otherwise the data update will fail even after the installation. So the installation location or the installation directory should have a minimum of 750 MB. And the temp location should have a 1 GB free space while the installation happens because of the staging of that endpoint security installation.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
What is the acceptable range of memory consumed by endpoint security?
That's a great question. Let me take it. So each processor consuming 450 MB of RAM is acceptable where this 450 MB of RAM is not completely taken by that particular process. It has shared memory also, a 430 MB of shared memory, which is used by the DAT or the virus signature. The reason why these processors have a shared memory is because the DAT signatures are the ones which are going to be referenced when the scan happens. So if the memory usage goes beyond the 700 MB for a particular process, then we can do the initial investigation as I mentioned, and Even though if you're still having the same problem, then you can create a service request, and we would be happy to help you.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. What is the fan notify in kernel module? I'll take that question, Vishnu. Kernel module and fan notify are two ways through which endpoint get file access events, that is open, read, write, etc. from the mission. With kernel module, endpoint hooks on the system calls to get the events. Later, Linux kernel itself provided a facility name called fan notify, where any user space application can register with fan notify feature to get all the events for processing. This avoids any user space application to write kernel modules for the same purpose. So, kernel module of fan notify pretty much does the same job. In endpoint, we generally load two modules, that is, on-access scan and access protection module. Now, access protection module can run only in kernel, and on-access can run in either in kernel or fan notify. Access protection, we ship modules for all platforms like SUSE, Ubuntu, Red Hat. But for on-access, we ship modules only for Red Hat-based operating system. Got it. Okay, thank you for that. How is the swap memory calculated?
Yeah, let me take that, Arvind. So when it comes to swap memory, since it's a substitute for the RAM memory, earlier it was using around double the size of the RAM memory. But right now, with modern systems, we do have RAM memory around 64 GB and 128 GB. So the double the size of the RAM memory is not possible, or it's a bit more when it comes to swap memory. So to use the swap memory, if the RAM memory is less than 2 gig or 2 GB, it will be having the double the size. And when it grows larger or the RAM memory increases, the swap memory also decreases. And there are machines which by default give a swap memory around 2 GB. In some machines, we can switch the swap memory off, as I did in the demo. But it's advisable to have a little space as a swap memory so that issues related to memory does not happen on the machine. Hope I answered that.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Would it be possible to install Endpoint Security for Linux with OAS throttle enabled? Or did I lose you?
Oh, I'll take that next. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
While deploying the endpoint threat prevention from APL, the deployment task page has a field name called command line. You shall enter user deferred scan, on-access scan CPU limit, and the value. If you are performing a standalone installation, after extracting the installation package from the product download site, you could see a file that is mfctp.sh. Run the installation script as sudo /install-mfctp.sh space user deferred scan space OAS CPU limit equal to and the value. Hope that helps.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. How to resolve if the /var /McAfee directory is getting full?
Let me take that, Arvind. So when it comes to the var directory of McAfee, the du command which we used in the demo can be used to check each and file folder occupancy of the hard disk. With that, we would be able to know whether the database or the logs, which folder of McAfee is consuming more space. And based on that, either purging or truncation of the logs can be tried, or in case if it's some other directory or folder based with McAfee, then in that case, we can create a service request and we would be able to let you know that whether this particular directory can be truncated or purged, because it shouldn't be causing any issues with the endpoint security application if it's removed or truncated. So to make sure that is safe to be removed or truncated, it is necessary that we can have a check always with the service request team by creating a service request with the technical team. Hope that helps.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. During this session, you mentioned that C group must be enabled if we wanted to throttle the CPU. Is there any workaround to this?
I'll take that question. Control group is a feature from operating system itself, which allows you to allocate resources like CPU, memory, network bandwidth, etc. So there is no other workaround for that.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. Is it safe to disable threat prevention during a high memory issue?
I'll take that question, Arvind. So when memory utilization is high, we need to check whether McAfee is involved in it. And if it's involved, we need to make sure which directory or which location is causing that issue. And with that, disabling in some issues or some troubleshooting steps, yes, we do try that to make sure that whether threat prevention is contributing to the memory usage. In case if it's not, or it can be troubleshooted without disabling, that would be better because disabling it would be causing a security threat. So rather, we try to not disable it, collect the logs, and see if that makes any difference, or we can make sure that the issue can be resolved without doing it. Hope that helps.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. We've got a few more questions in the Q&A box, but they look to be a little bit more specific. I think what we'll do is we'll collect the questions that are left here and have our subject matter experts reach out to you directly to answer those questions after the session is over. I do want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and a big thank you to our speakers, Arvind and Vishnu. As a reminder, a link to today's recorded presentation will be emailed to all participants. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about future session topics, please email me at nick.barnes@trellix.com. This concludes today's webinar. Stay safe, everyone.